You want to say something first, Abby? We can do
Yeah,
that.
well, I'd like to introduce him, but
Oh,
first,
yeah.
I would like to, before we get started, Beverly Berry would like to make an announcement. So Beverly, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hello.
Hello.
I don't know if you can see me. Oh, well, here we go. Hi, Dr. Diggs. I went to Austin College, so.
Oh,
Yay!
hi.
Good
to see you.
My big announcement is Jan Larson and I are in charge of the plant seed exchange for the 2023 class coming up starting in January. We will be doing that seed and plant exchange on the 29th of April. So right now, there'll be lots more information about specifics, but start saving your seeds, label them what they are, shade or sun, germination time, those kinds of things. And if you're starting things in your greenhouse, that is wonderful too, but we only can take 4-inch pots. So there'll be lots more information on mark your calendars on the website, but thank you so much for letting me make this start now message. Thanks.
You bet. Thank you very much for that. I know that's always a highlight for the students. So very nice. Let me introduce our guest speaker. Mr. George Diggs is going to be speaking to us about the Ferns of Texas, why the Lone Star State is so special. Dr. Diggs says Texas has a surprising number, 127 of native ferns and lycophytes, the most of any state in the continental US. This is particularly unexpected given that most people associate ferns and related plants with humid, even tropical conditions. That's the opposite of most of Texas. But Texas's diverse species thrive under a variety of conditions, including some that are very extreme. These include crevices on huge exposed granite outcrops, underwater in the bottoms of ponds or lakes, inside cave entrances, and in the desert of West Texas. One Texas species has leaves that get nearly 13 feet long. Another is a tiny floating aquatic, often less than ½ an inch in total size. Many Texas species occur nowhere else in the entire United States. Dr. Diggs' talk for us will look broadly at Texas ferns, ranging from the swamp forest of East Texas to the hidden canyons of the Edwards Plateau, and even to the high mountain sky islands of places like Big Bend National Park. Dr. Diggs, if you go ahead, welcome to our September meeting of the Dallas County Master Gardener Association.
Thank you very much, Abby. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys. I'll just go ahead and begin. So the title of my talk is, as Abby mentioned, Ferns of Texas, Why the Lone Star State is So Diverse. And that is something that's quite surprising, and I think you'll agree as I go through my talk. So I want to acknowledge my longtime colleague and friend, Barney Lipscomb. He is at the Botanical Research Institute of Texas, and a lot of the work that this talk is based on was for a book we published a number of years ago called The Ferns and Lycophytes of Texas, and he was my co-author in that book. So you can get more information about Ferns of Texas online. There's things called, the link is fernsoftexas.org, and the book is available through BRIT. If y'all don't know about BRIT, the Botanical Research Institute of Texas in Fort Worth, I expect most of you know about it. It's associated with the botanical garden there, and it's an impressive resource for botany in the state. They have a herbarium of about 1.5 million plant specimens. That's the largest anywhere in Texas and this whole region, in fact. So I'm going to talk about diversity first. How many are there, and some of the strange morphology and habitat. And then what are lycophytes? A little bit about biogeography, and then special adaptations, how these plants stay alive under extreme conditions. So first, Texas is number one. We have 127 species of native ferns and lycophytes. That's the most of any state in the continental US. We didn't know that until we started doing this research. If anybody had asked me, even as a trained botanist who had been teaching about plants for decades, I would have said it was Florida. But it turns out Texas is number one. Florida is a close second with 113 native species, and Virginia is third with 100. In addition to our native species, we have another 12 naturalized species. This means ferns and lycophytes that have gotten here somehow typically by human intent, sometimes accidentally, gotten here and have gone wild. They have naturalized, they're able to reproduce on their own. Some of these are quite interesting. Some are actually horrifying, like this Salvinia molesta, the giant Salvinia that can take over lakes. That picture on the right is of it just literally covering the surface of a lake. I'll talk a bit more about it. It's one of the worst weeds in the world. Okay, let's see. This species is a naturalized one that is now our newest addition to the ferns of Texas. It's native to Australia and New Caledonia. It's called Australian water clover. I know that doesn't look like a fern, but you guys are gardeners and you may have actually grown some of these water clovers in your gardens or in an aquatic garden. This was newly reported in an article in 2021. It's escaped and is naturalized in Travis County. And it was probably, my hypothesis would be that an aquarium was dumped out into a pond or a creek, and then that's how this thing escaped, would be my guess. This is our newest native species. Another colleague and I published a paper about this in 2011, and this plant, it's called Lavi's fern, Yavia cordifolia. It's known from only one place in the state, and that's from Big Bend State Park, not the national park, but the state park. And not only is it known in the US, only in Texas, nowhere else in the whole country is this thing native. It's really a Mexican fern that comes just far enough to be in Big Bend. And we didn't realize this until we started working on our book, and we discovered that a specimen had been collected here in the US. That's actually a plant that's being grown of this species. It's an interesting fern, and you can see that the fertile leaflets are different from the main leaflets, the photosynthetic leaflets. The fertile leaflets are just little linear things, and that's where the spores are produced. This is a fern that was recently described as new to science. So this one was never known anywhere in the world until it was published about in 2011. Its common name is the Tejas quillwort. It's actually a lycophyte. It's a very interesting plant, and it's only known down on the coast. Very, very limited in its occurrence, and this plant is probably in danger of extinction as sea levels rise, and the place where it grows is probably going to be inundated. Now, let's talk about a little bit how diverse these organisms are in terms of their morphology, in other words, their form, what they look like, and where they grow. their habitat. So this is our smallest native fern. That actually, there are several plants there on the tip of that person's finger. The whole plant is less than a ½ inch long, and this is called Azolla caroliniana, the Carolina mosquito fern. And as master gardeners, I imagine at least some of you have aquatic gardens. I have one in my backyard, an aquatic garden, and many years I grow some of this little Azolla in the pond. It sometimes survives the winter. It did not survive that real cold winter, and I haven't reintroduced it, but it's a little floating aquatic, and can be found on lakes and ponds. It's native to Texas, and it's a cute little thing. Hard to believe it's a fern, but nonetheless, it is. And here are a couple of other tiny species. I like these little, I don't know, somehow I just like these little ferns. One of them is a Botrychium, a little grape fern, the one on the left, and the one on the right is a little adder's tongue. That's an Ophioglossum. So these are a couple of our other small species, and you can see the size relative to a human hand. In contrast, this is our largest native species. This is the genus Denstadia. The particular one is called a beaded couplet fern. The leaves of this can be up to 13 feet long. This is a Mexican species, basically, that just gets over into the US, and it has an unusual place it's growing. It's unusual both in terms of its habitat and its morphology. It's known in Texas from the mouth of a cave entrance. And so my hypothesis is that this probably got to Texas, the spores of this fern probably got to Texas from Mexico being carried on bats, because that's the only place we know of it in Texas. And specimens were collected a number of years ago on a leaf. We have this leaf in a museum. They collected a leaf that was 13 feet long. It's kind of astonishing. This is a picture of that species actually taken in Mexico to give you an idea of what it looks like. But it can have very large leaves. So it's kind of a tremendous contrast with the little mosquito fern you saw previously. What is the strangest habitat where ferns grow in our state? Well, some float on the water. This is the red stuff you see here is the little mosquito fern. It's basically covering this pond, and it's turned red because I took this picture in the summer, and it was under stress being exposed to full sun, and plants often produce a reddish pigment if they're stressed in some way. And this little mosquito fern turned red. And the yellow that you see mixed in with it, that's a little, that's a floating flowering plant called a bladderwort. And those are the little yellow things are the flowers sticking up there. So we have things floating on the surface. We have species that actually grow underwater. There's one that only appears when lakes go down and there's a band around the edge of lakes underwater. But normally when the lakes are at full level, the plants are submerged. But during droughts, they're exposed just at a certain distance out from the edge of the pond or lake. Other species grow in cracks in rocks, and still others grow in caves. So, there's no answer to this question. What's the strangest habitat? We could debate this. You can take your favorite. This little thing is the one I talked about growing underwater. The one on the right, sorry, the one on the left. It's the one that grows underwater. a little, and if you don't believe it's a fern, on the right, you see a close-up of its little fiddlehead, the little tiny reproductive leaf. And as you all know, as gardeners, fern leaves typically open up like a little fiddlehead unrolling. So that's one that typically grows underwater. This is one that grows out in the Trans-Pecos, for example, in the Big Bend area. It literally grows in cracks in rocks. That's called a cloak fern. And this one, this broad halbert fern, we can find this down in the hill country, for example, and it grows in often in caves or cave entrances. And in fact, if I was going to say what's the strangest habitat in Texas, I would pick the broad halbert fern because it grows inside Devil's Sinkhole. Now this is a collapsed limestone cavern out in the western part of the Edwards Plateau in Edwards County. And this is basically the cave that collapsed. And the opening where the cave collapsed at the top is about 45 to 65 feet in diameter, depending on which way you measure it. And the only way to get down in there is to rappel down 140 feet. So it's just, you're basically rappelling in from the roof of a collapsed cave, and you've got to go down 140 feet. In there live millions of Brazilian free-tailed bats. Now let's look at what it's like when you look up. So if one is down in the cave and you look up, there are these vertical walls, and you can see the hole up there. And that green stuff, I hope the PowerPoint is clear enough that you can see the green stuff, that's the broad halbert fern. So for my money, I'm going to pick that as the strangest habitat. Some of you may say, well, I think it's stranger to grow underwater. That's fine. It's kind of fun that ferns can survive in such radically different places. Now, how about the strangest structure for a fern? Well, there's one fern that we have a few occurrences of over in Far East Texas. It's very, very rare in Texas. It's called the whisk fern. It's pronounced Psilotum. That's a silent P, Psilotum nudum. And I wanted to mention its scientific name, particularly the nudum part, because it basically looks like naked stems with the spore cases on it. This plant has no roots or leaves. So it's basically naked stems. There's stems kind of stick down in the ground that can grow actually as an epiphyte up on a tree trunk. But that's a pretty strange thing. And some of you as gardeners have probably dealt with horsetails. The one on the right is Equisetum hyemale, the scouring rush horsetail. And this has jointed stems and little tiny, tiny leaves. Those little blackish things you can see are kind of the little shriveled leaves. They're just minute. The plant photosynthesizes through its stems. I will warn you as gardeners, this is not something I recommend you plant. It's a very interesting thing. It's one of the strangest ferns. When I took botany years ago, we did not think it was a fern. And in fact, there was a big argument that was finally settled by molecular biology. And molecular biology tells us that indeed it is a fern. But this thing can be horribly aggressive. It can take over an area of your landscape. It's incredibly difficult to kill. It can take over an area in an aquatic garden as well, in gravel, for instance, and is very difficult to get rid of. So I would just say as gardeners, be careful if you're going to plant one of these horsetails in your landscape. It's not as bad as a bamboo. but it's pretty bad. Let me just say, I welcome anybody want to make a comment. Has anybody had to fight this thing in their own garden? No, no comments.
I
I've had
will.
to fight it both in
I saw-
terrestrial and aquatic settings.
I saw this in Germany.
Ah,
It was Germany. Let me think now. No, it wasn't Germany. It was in Israel. And it was in a garden, what is it, planter by a window. And that was all that was in there.
Yeah.
And it was beautiful, but it was, then I looked it up. I thought, oh, I'll plant that. And then I looked it up and said, no.
right. If I was going to plant this thing again, it would definitely be where it couldn't get away. Okay, thank you for your comment. So I think this is worth a mention. I showed you briefly a slide of this. This is the giant salvinia. Its scientific name is also interesting, molesta, and it indeed molests or causes problems. It can form mats on the surface of lakes up to 1 meter thick. Now, I want you to kind of wrap your mind around that. These things, these are the plants in the person's hand, and they just reproduce like crazy, and they can just get all on top of one another and cause these mats on the surface of lakes. These were originally from South America. They've been taken probably as aquarium plants and then accidental escapes all over the world and have become horribly problematic. We do have this in East Texas. It's been fought for the last number of years. Fortunately, I just want to show you what this can be like. So this is a picture of a scientist in a lake. She's doing some sampling. There's a white thing made out of PVC tubes right beside her. But if you look closely, right in front of the person, there's a cinder block sitting on, it's partially submerged. There's enough of that floating fern that it can support the weight of a cinder block. It's kind of astonishing. And you can imagine that then prevents using that lake for anything else. Fortunately, biologists have figured out a way to reduce the numbers. Turns out there's an insect in South America, that's that little beetle down in the lower right. It's an insect that specializes on this species. And so it has been introduced into Texas. It's a little Salvinia weevil. It's been introduced in Texas and is helping to keep this under check in the state. It's only known out from some of the lakes in the eastern part of the state. Now, I'm going to shift gears and talk about why are there so many species in Texas? Well, first, you might say size. Well, I would say no, size is not the important thing, because I want to give you an example. Alaska is nearly 2.2 times as large as Texas. But Alaska only has 68 ferns and lycophytes. So it doesn't even have, it's about half of our species. What's much more important is the fact that we are in the southern part of the US. Our latitude is southerly, and that's also the case with Florida. Diversity, how many species there are, varies with latitude. And this is remarkably important. This is kind of a basic rule in biology. As you move from the poles towards the equator, you get more and more species. And I want to emphasize this by mentioning a tiny little country that I've spent a lot of time in. It's a delightful place to visit if you love to see plants or wonderful rainforest there, little country of Costa Rica. It is 1/13 the size of Texas, but it has over 1,000 species of ferns and lycophytes. So That just goes to show how much diversity there is as you move towards the tropics. But Texas is much further south than much of the US, and so that helps in terms of making us a very species-rich state compared to other states in the US. So southern latitude is one reason. Another reason is high habitat diversity. This is a map that's used in many books on plants in Texas. And you can see each of those colors represents a different vegetational area or habitat. And so number one, for example, over in the far east, those are the deciduous forest of East Texas. Not only deciduous trees, there are often some pines mixed in. And on the other hand, number 10, the very dry area over in far west Texas. It's shockingly different in terms of rainfall. On the border with Louisiana, we get nearly 60 inches of rain a year, whereas over in El Paso, they get about 8 inches average rainfall a year. So remarkable difference in habitat as we go across the state and as we go to different parts of the state that have different geologies. So this is something that was kind of shocking, and you can see I updated this slide as we learn more. This is also something that I was surprised about, even though I'd lived in Texas for many, many years and had studied Texas plants and written books on Texas plants. This shocked me when we first came up with these numbers. I was doing a calculation and I got my co-author and I said, "You're not going to believe this. The Trans-Pecos, that dry part of Texas, has more species of ferns and lycophytes than East Texas does, 80 versus only 62. And that seems counterintuitive because we think about ferns as being abundant in wet forest, in stream bottoms, things like that. But West Texas has some special spots that I'm going to tell you more about that makes it quite rich. And its location also makes it quite rich, being adjacent to Mexico. So this is very counterintuitive. So here we have pictures from the Trans-Pecos. These are the Chisos Mountains. Many of you have been out to Big Bend. The Chisos Mountains are the ones up in Big Bend. And there are lots of ferns high up in these mountains. These things high in the mountains occur, the ferns and lycophytes there typically occur in what we call sky islands. Now you might be wondering, well, why are we calling these sky islands? And in particular, we call these Madeiran sky islands. Well, they're called Madeiran because they're similar to the Sierra Madre Mountains of Mexico. In other words, in some ways, they're like an extension of this large mountain range in Mexico called the Sierra Madre. But we call them sky islands because these are tiny islands of special habitats, these mountain peaks separated by vast oceans of inhospitable desert. So these little sky islands are just sticking up right out of the desert, basically. And when you hike up into the mountains, you get up into oak and pine forest, and it's much more humid up there. And so you have a lot of things growing in these sky islands. East Texas forests obviously have a lot of ferns, not as many, but we have to think about something different because I've actually waded through chest or head tall fern thickets over in East Texas. So the amount in stream bottoms, for example, the amount of fern tissue, or what we would call biomass, is much, much greater in East Texas. in the Trans-Pecos, the ferns and lycophytes we find are often little tiny things, small numbers up in these sky islands. Whereas in East Texas, in river bottoms, you can walk, for example, in the big thicket, the national land over there, in the national forest as well. You can walk along miles of stream bottom and there's fern, you're surrounded by ferns. So, you know, this is a shot over on the left in East Texas, and there are floating ferns there. And here's a bottomland, one of these meandering streams in East Texas. Those bottomland forests are just full of ferns. It's just, there are lots of individuals of the same species. But we can't forget this, as I just said, biomass. The pictures there you see, that's just basically ferns with trees sticking up through all the fern. So a huge amount of fern tissue in East Texas. And there are a lot of ferns and lycophytes in the hill country, the area that we call the Edwards Plateau. It has some fascinating special places. There are many moist canyons, little micro habitats. This is a little canyon in the Edwards Plateau, and you can see this wall here, where it's a very damp wall. There's probably water trickles down through there much of the year, and much of that you're seeing is maidenhair fern, and it's very damp. Even during periods of very dry weather, the ferns are able to survive in these special little micro habitats. There's one place in the Edwards Plateau called Enchanted Rock that is kind of fascinating. It's a state park. Many of you have visited there, I imagine. I've been many times. It's a large rock outcrop that sticks up, and that area of Enchanted Rock, the rock itself and just right around it, has 29 species of ferns and lycophytes. If you compare that with the entire state of Nebraska, that entire state has only 33. So this is an area of very high diversity in the hill country. So we find some special places in Texas, and there are some unique species that grow in that area of Enchanted Rock. Now, you've heard me say the word lycophyte. What the heck is a lycophyte? And why do we talk about ferns and lycophytes together? Well, the technical term for ferns and their related plants, ferns and fern allies, the technical term, these are pteridophytes. And we lump these things together because these are vascular plants. They have vascular tissue, unlike mosses. These have vascular tissue. And these reproduce using single cell spores. They produce no seeds. They only produce spores. And spores are typically produced in a little structure called a sporangium. And when you look at the back of a fern leaf, for instance, you often can see a little pile of these sporangia. And botanists make jokes about, oh, you need to clean the back of your fern leaf off, but these are actually the reproductive structures. And that's how ferns reproduce. And lycophytes, they both reproduce only using spores, no seeds. So you can see the back of leaves here, and these are little clusters of these sporangia, these spore-producing structures, and we call these little clumps of sporangia, we call them a singular would be a sori, sorry, a multiple would be sori, and a group of them would be sorus. So let's look at some numbers. There are about worldwide, and you can get some argument about this, but as a botanist who's been studying plants now for more than 40 years. My best guess is somewhere around 300,000 species of flowering plants. Flowering plants are the dominant plants on our planet. There's no question about that. Some people would say more than 300,000. Some people might say a bit less, but I think that's a rational number. There are about 840 species of gymnosperms. So these are seed-bearing plants that don't produce flowers. So these are the conifers and their relatives, things like pines and junipers and redwoods. So only 840 species of gymnosperms worldwide. So while we have pines and junipers in Texas, these plants are of a lineage that in the distant past used to dominate the planet, but now they've been replaced, not totally, but mostly by flowering plants. And likewise, there are about 12,000 species of ferns and lycophytes on Earth. And these are interesting because they're the descendants of the most ancient surviving vascular plants. So when vascular plants evolved, we think somewhere a bit more maybe than 400 million years ago, these are the things today that are most similar to these early vascular plants. So only about 1,200 species worldwide of ferns and lycophytes. And we now understand a lot more based on molecular biology. If you look at this diagram, you see that there are three main branches. One branch split off from the rest about 400 million years ago, and those are the lycophytes. And then there's a branch that leads to both the ferns and the seed plants. And somewhere along that line, some of the ferns evolved into seed plants, and some of the ferns are still with us today, their descendants. So we basically have three groups. And so these are three very distinct groups, but because both ferns and lycophytes reproduce by spores, most botanists, when they study these, study both of these groups. And we now know much more about their relationships than botanists did for many, many years. When I first started studying botany, we did not have we couldn't study molecular evolution, and now we can. And so we understand the relationships much, much better today than we used to. So the lycophytes, club mosses, and their relatives represent, these are living representatives of the oldest surviving group of vascular plants. They're a fascinating group. We don't have that many in the state. Club mosses can be quite interesting, quite pretty. And we also have some that are called quillworts and spike mosses. So there are really three groups within the lycophytes: the quillworts, the spike mosses, and the club mosses. These are not mosses. And that's just the name that was given to them years ago. But these things reproduce by spores. So that's what a lycophyte is. It's a spore-producing plant, but it's in its own lineage. Now let's talk about ferns per se. Ferns represent only about 3% of living vascular plants. So ferns are kind of special right there. There are way more flowering plants. Ferns represent a small number. These are mostly in the tropics. And in the past 20, 25 years, huge advances have been made in understanding fern evolution. We now understand how the different groups of ferns are related to each other. And I'm not going to spend much time talking about this, But this is what we call a phylogeny, or a look at the evolutionary history or evolutionary tree. And one thing you'll note over on the left, if you look 4 names in, over on the left, there's something that says equisitales. That's where the horsetails are. And botanists fought over that for years. The molecular evidence finally told us that horsetails were really ferns. Didn't matter how much they didn't look like ferns, they really were ferns. We now know that this one, we call it a whisk fern. We did not think this thing was a fern, but we now know it is, this Psilotum nudum. And as I just said, we now know that the horsetails are ferns. If you had asked me the first 10 to 15 years of teaching botany, I would have said, well, everybody knows a horsetail is not a fern. It's in its own group. Hey, I had to learn something new. Okay, I want to talk briefly about a couple of others as I wrap up, a couple of other kind of fascinating things about the ferns and lycophytes. One is where they occur, the strange locations. In other words, biogeography, the study of the geographic distribution of plants and animals. And as you all know, you can only find the African elephant in one place. That's Africa. You only find the giraffe in one place. That happens to be Africa. We also have some strange things with plants. This little Rocky Mountain spike moss is known in Texas only from one county, Brewster County. That's where Big Bend is. It's known from one county. Why? You know, to me, this is kind of fascinating. We only have in that one place. Why there? Well, if we study this plant more broadly, we can understand why. This is where it occurs in the US. It occurs, in fact, all the way from up in Canada, comes all the way down through the Rockies, goes down into the Sierras, all the way down into California, and it occurs on the high mountain peak over in West Texas. So once you understand this, its occurrence in Texas doesn't seem so strange. Here's another one. This is called the Mexican flowering fern. It does not have flowers, but it has pretty reproductive structure that sticks up, the spore-bearing part. And it's in the US, only in Texas. And it's down there in the hill country, and it's at one famous preserve called West Cave. And it's in a few counties, a number of counties down in the hill country. Why? Well, when we look at the next map, I think it's easy to see. It occurs down into Mexico, that adjacent area, and comes up into a similar habitat in Texas. And even the name gives you a hint. It's Anemia mexicana, mainly in Mexico, but in a bit of the hill country of Texas. Now here's another strange thing. This is happens to be a quillwort, a lycophyte that occurs widely in the Appalachians. And then it is known from 3 counties in central Texas. Why? Well, we call this a disjunct distribution. In other words, it's disjunct. It's known from only its occurrence in one area and then an occurrence in another area. And there are 2 possible causes of this. One is that it somehow got carried from one area to the other. So that would be called long distance dispersal. Sometimes birds carry either swallowing a seed and carrying a seed a long way, or it sticks to the outside, or maybe they're carrying spores. That's called long distance dispersal. The other possibility is what we call vicariance. And I like to call this the survivor theory. So we've got in one case the constipated bird theory, in the other case the survivor theory. Vicariance, or the survivor theory, is where a species at one time was very widespread, and climate has changed and conditions have changed, and now they're left in just a few places. And Texas has great examples of both. And I'll just quickly show you. So this is Pelea wrightiana, Wright's cliff break. You can see where it occurs in Texas and New Mexico and Arizona. And there's one place it occurs out in North Carolina. We think this is a great example of long distance dispersal. Spores simply blown with the westerly winds over into a similar habitat in the Appalachians. Likewise, this is a little lip fern. It's over here in the Southwest, and we have a location in the Appalachians. In fact, we have seven different examples of ferns where this occurs. And we think these are long distance dispersal because, as we all know, a lot of our winds come from the west, and a lot of our storm systems move from the west and sweep to the east. But this is this is called sensitive fern. By the way, it's called that because it's very sensitive to frost. Frost kills it to the ground. The rhizomes survive underneath, but it's very, very sensitive to frost. We think this is an example of vicariance. So you can see it occurs all over in the eastern US and southeastern Canada, and then there are a few spots down in central Texas. Why do I say that this is an example of vicariance? Well, this is where we see both fossil and modern Onoclea, sensitive fern. And so in the circled areas are where this group of ferns occur today. So we see them living in only two spots on the planet, Eastern North America and Eastern Asia. But we see fossils of them on Greenland, up in the high Arctic of Canada, England. These things we think once grew all around the Northern Hemisphere, and climate has changed, and they're only surviving in two places, Eastern US, Eastern North America, and Eastern Asia. And in Texas, they're surviving in some little spots in the hill country that's still very moist, even though climate has changed. So we would then say, this is probably an example of vicariance. In other words, the survivor theory. They're surviving in more than one place. And here's another example, the cinnamon fern. It occurs in the Edwards Plateau. You see that one dot down there. It also is probably surviving, in this case, from glacial times, and during glacial times, Texas was much different in climate than it is now. And we know Texas was different in climate because we can do what are called bog cores. In central Texas, there are some bogs, and we can do cores down into those bogs, and you can get down to a level where the remains in the bogs are quite old, and we find in the layers down like 14, 15,000 years ago, we find the pollen of white spruce. Today, that only occurs up in the far northern US and Canada. So we know climate in Texas used to be different. And so we know that some of these things that we find in the hill country are probably surviving in special little micro habitats where it's moist and has been moist, even though the climate has changed a lot since the ice ages. Now, the final thing I'll mention, any detail, are desert adaptations, because I find this fascinating. How do you survive in the desert? When you look at these fern leaves, they look very different, don't they? They have special hairs and scales, and there are different ways to avoid dryness. For one thing, you could become dormant. And there are things here that we have that do become dormant. That's how they avoid the dryness. They only appear when it's moisture. They can have very tiny leaves. They can curl their leaves. Their leaves can be thick. They can have hairs or scales or what we call a farina, a covering. So they either avoid or tolerate dryness. I'll just show you a few of the interesting ferns and lycophytes from West Texas and how they do it. This little cloak fern is covered with scales and hairs, and they reflect light and they reduce moisture loss. That's a hairy leaf, isn't it? This little cloak fern has scales completely covering the lower surface of the leaf, totally covering it. That reduces water loss. This is called Copeland's fern, Copeland's cloak fern. It has a waxy material. It's called a farina. The back of its leaf, you can see, is completely covered with that wax-like stuff. That keeps it from drying out. And this is a close-up of one of the cloak ferns. You can see the whole underneath side of the leaf covered with that wax. This is covered with slightly different color wax, different species. And this plant, it has these tough, thick leaves that often curl. It's able to tolerate dryness that way. And this is one that's particularly fun. This is called the resurrection plant. This is a lycophyte, and this is what it looks like when there's moisture around. And this is what it looks like when it's dry. It curls up and goes into dormancy, into suspended animation. It's simply avoiding the dryness. And if you take one of those plants like that and you put it in water, you can literally see what happens. You put it in a bowl of water. At the upper left, you can see it's been in there a little while. It's opened up partially. And then on the right, it's opened up fully and ready to go again. So when it rains, it can get ready and go. So finally, we consider, my co-author and I, 63 of the 127 Texas natives to be of conservation concern at the state level. In other words, about half. Many species are known in Texas only from one county. And 19 of our species are known in the US only from Texas. So if they're lost in Texas, these 19, they're lost from our country. And there are many species known from only one county. If they're lost from that county, they're lost from the state. This one is known only in the Chisos Mountains, the Chisos holly fern. This one, likewise, known only in the Chisos Mountains. I just wanted to give you several examples. This one is known only from Bowie County in the far northeastern part of our state. This one is known only from Central Texas. It's found nowhere else in the world. It's endemic to Texas. If it's lost from Texas, it's gone. And then my final slide, there are a bunch of threats. Habitats are being destroyed, weeds are being introduced from other places. And unfortunately, many of our species are not visually obvious, and they don't have a lot of economic importance. In other words, they're not going to make anybody any money, so they're not very important. That slide, this slide shows something that happens over in East Texas. Native forest over there is often cut, and these giant machines go in and just try to root out anything that's alive and homogenize that whole area, and then you can plant pines. And so any ferns that would be growing on any embankments or anything, their habitat is wiped out. So that's a threat too. That's one example of a problem with habitat destruction. So that's all I have. I'll stop. I'm happy to try to answer any questions. And it's certainly been a pleasure being here with you.
Ellen, do we have any questions?
We had one comment a while back. Mary Whitlow said that she killed a horsetail.
Good for you. That's impressive. We have one spot on the Austin College campus where we're fighting it right now, and it's tough.
Crazy. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Griggs. This has been just lovely, and I've learned a lot. So
Well.
we appreciate your time and your effort and all that you're doing.
Well, thank you for having me.
Here's one question. Oh, sorry.
Are there any edible ferns? There is a fern that in some parts of the world is eaten called the bracken fern, but they eat the fiddleheads, but unfortunately, there are toxins in that fern. And so I would say that it is not a good idea to eat it. There is controversy about that, but I personally would not eat it. Many plants have toxins, and this particular fern unfortunately has toxins. And despite the fact that some people eat it, others think that it can cause pretty serious health problems. So I wouldn't recommend it. Are there any that are easy to propagate at home? I have friends, I live out in the country and I have a big garden, but I don't have any real moist spots. And so I've tried to grow a few of the desert ferns, but my soil really isn't very good. The only one that I've grown successfully has been that little mosquito fern in my aquatic garden. But I have friends who grow the maidenhair. If they have a very humid spot in their backyard, they can sometimes grow maidenhair. There are some that will grow outdoors in Dallas. I see this, and I would say that what I would recommend in this regard, if you go somewhere like North Haven Gardens, the nursery in Dallas, they sometimes have some ferns that they've kind of vetted that they know grow, can survive in the Dallas area. But ferns are often fairly particular with their soil type and their humidity requirements. So they're not as easy to grow as some of our natives.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Diggs. We appreciate your time today.
It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Very interesting. Thank you. Bye-bye. Our next speaker is our wonderful AgriLife Extension agent, Katarina Graham. Katarina, if you want to unmute and turn on your camera.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Good afternoon, everyone. Very nice talk there, Dr. Diggs. Thank you so much. I have also learned a lot and I have tons of notes. So very nice to hear all of that information. So it's been a while since I've been in front of you, so I probably have a few updates. And I will start with a very appropriate announcement, and that is that we are all very fortunate to now have a Master Gardener Coordinator, and her name is Fern Brown. So I thought that was super cute that it matches the topic for the day. So you probably, if you have not received emails or notifications from Fern, if you do, it's because she is helping me with the Master Gardener program, and I'm very grateful to her. Next, we also, since I last spoke to you, now have a new Dallas County Extension Director at our Dallas County office of LBJ, and her name is Xiomara Diaz, and she comes to us from Ohio. And before that, she worked in Houston, and she is being with Extension about 15 years. So she brings a lot of experience, especially with 4-H, and she has been extremely supportive. So we're extremely happy to have her stop by the office, meet her. She's wonderful. Now on to volunteer opportunity, and that is just a reminder that the state fair is opening tomorrow, and a email went out several weeks ago offering all of you an opportunity to sign up via Sign Up Genius. And if you are interested, have not signed up, you can go to volunteersignup.org/M as in mother, B as in boy, C, R, M as in mother. So maybe Cynthia, I will touch base with her to send that out one more time. But yes, I understand that the state fair is very popular. I have never been. I'm looking forward to going. And maybe I will run into some of you there. It runs through October 23rd, by the way. Also, we have some classes going on. One has already begun, but the one that I wanted to mention is the winemaking class. That will be a 3-part series that will take place 3 Saturdays, October 22nd, October 29th, and November 19th. So Michael Cook, our specialist viticulture for North Texas, will be teaching it, and we will be helping him. So if you are interested in signing up for that class, it just went up again on the Facebook page if you want to access the link to the registration. The registration will end October 6th because we will have to place an order for the different supplies, and so we'll have to have a count by then. So make sure that you sign up if you're interested in learning how to make wine. Let's see. I have been pretty busy this last 2 months, going to many different conferences and workshops that have to do with extension, but also there really seems to be a new synergy in Dallas around urban agriculture. And so I'll just mention a couple of the different forums that I've been to. There was a Urban Agriculture Conservation Forum put on by NRCS 2 weeks ago. Also, there was a Dallas Hunger Summit put on by Baylor College of Nursing. We are also working with the City of Dallas Urban Agriculture Coordinator, Rebecca Siebert, to put together a Dallas Urban Agricultural Conference, probably in January or February of next year. So it's exciting to see so many different organizations and agencies coming together to tackle not so much food insecurity, but nutrition insecurity. And so it's very empowering to see so many faces at these meetings. Speaking of that, we started last week offering a community garden education series at the urban farm down in Garland at the R&B facility. And we will be basically teaching what you all have already the knowledge about, which is, soils, irrigations, IPM, fruits and veggies. But this is all for new gardeners, for beginner gardeners who want to garden in community gardens, and then, just share the produce with their neighborhoods. And so we are collaborating with the Health and Human Services Department of the City of Dallas to bring this program to beginning gardening individuals and community garden managers. Yes, I saw that request for the volunteer sign up. So again, it's for the state fair, volunteer sign up, one word, .org/M as in mother, B as in boy, C, R, M as in mother, MBCRM. Let's see, do we have anything else to say? I think that's pretty much it. Just lots of planning and still networking, still meeting and going to new projects. I finally made it to Bonton Farms this week, which I always hear about. And I still have not made it to all of the Master Gardener projects, but now that it's cooling off, I do plan to try maybe once or twice a month to visit the various projects. So thanks again to all of you for your volunteer efforts, and also thank you for being patient with my lack of recognition of faces. Sometimes it cracks me up that I'll say, "Oh, I haven't met you yet," and they're like, "Yes, you have." So I am sorry. There are just many of you, but that is wonderful. So now we are going back to Abby so that she can continue with the meeting. Thank you all.
Thank you, Katerina. It's good to see you again.
Thank you.
I would like to make a couple of announcements now.
Hey, Abby, can I interrupt? There is a question about when will the Master Gardener applicants be notified about their application status?
As far as the new class in January,
I think so. When will they know they've gotten in or whatever?
Katerina?
I don't have that date in front of me. I know that we do have, I mean, we're going to be conducting interviews. So the date I do remember is that we will be closing registration for the intern class of 2023 on October 8th. After that, we will be conducting 2 or 3 weeks, 2 weeks of interviews. So I believe, Fern, are you on this chat? I don't know if maybe Fern can help me, but I believe that sometime at the end of October, beginning of November, I think that we will be notifying the people that have been accepted.
That is correct.
Okay.
We're shooting for the end of November, 1st of December to send out the communication. Always contingent upon background checks.
Right. Thank you. 50 slots is what we are going to have for this coming intern class.
And so far we have 47 applicants.
Oh, man,
Yeah. So
that's great.
awesome.
Okay,
Thank you, Fern.
thank you. Thank you both. Okay, announcements. Barbara St. Clair. She wanted to send a big thank you to everyone who donated for the North Texas Giving Day. We raised over $3,800, which was very, very comparable to what we did last year. So that's a really big deal. And also start looking effective this Saturday, October 1st, the Sign Up Genius for the Japanese maple tree sale will go live. And it's a Sign Up Genius, but it will have all the different varieties available with a little description and a picture, and if it's sun or if it's shade. So you can go and start looking, but the site for purchasing won't go live until October the 7th. And then because you're all wonderful master gardeners and want to come to vote for our new board members at the October 27th meeting at Raincatchers, that's where you can pick up your purchases. So you can come and enjoy lunch at the October meeting and then take your Japanese maple home with you. So that was really exciting. And this from Cynthia Jones. If you are not getting the twice monthly Mark Your Calendar email, this is your one stop to keep current as to what is happening with MGs. If you are not getting this email, first go to the VMS listing and check that your email is correct. If not, update it, please. Second, you could add to your contact list communications@dallasmga.com. And that way your phone, tablet, iPad will recognize that as not as spam. And third, of course, you can always check your trash or your junk file. So that's great. And I guess Cynthia Jones can field any questions in regards to that. Shout outs. I don't know if you saw it a couple weeks ago in the Dallas Morning News, our own Roseanne Ferguson had a wonderful article written about her and her activities at TDG. You can go through the Dallas Morning News archive and pull that up. It was a wonderful article with pictures. And let me see. And I wanted to give a shout out to Maggie Saucedo for leading the team to create a Monarch Way station with the help of Friends of the Sopak Trail and the City of Dallas Parks and Recreation Department. Roger Sanderson designed the plan, and Roseanne Ferguson guided the plant selection and was on hand to assist in planting. There's a great article about this on our website. So please take a moment and go look both of those up. They're full of great kudos.
Hey, Abby, it's
Yes.
Joelle. Let me interrupt with the chat item.
Sure.
Well, Mark kind of responded, but we got Nancy Bierman said, does anyone know whom she should contact to see about having a new project approved for Master Gardeners to charge time to? This would be an individual project to start, but she thinks she'll need more help down the road. We've had, Mark said she could reach out to him. Unless Katerina has some other, I don't know what really the process is there.
I think we go through on advisory in conjunction with Mr. Mark Jones.
Okay,
So-
there you go.
That's where I would start, with Barry Bloom and then with Mark Jones. Okay, at this time, I would like to invite Carol Rybarski from our class of 2017 to co-host and tell us all about Kids Springs Park in Oak Cliff. So welcome, Carol.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with the Japanese Garden at Kids Springs, but Kids Springs Park is located in North Oak Cliff near the Bishop Arts District. The Japanese Garden is embedded within the park itself, and right now it's closed. Next slide, please. It's being constructed upon right now. It's the park received funding from a bond program in 2017, and the work's happening right now as we speak, and it should be completed later this fall. Next. The very first thing they did, this was way back in March when they started the construction, they protected the artifacts. We have 3 Japanese artifacts from the 1600s, and we have a curator of public arts who made sure that they're safe through all of the destruction and now construction. These are 2 of them. Next. The next thing they did after that was to fence off the entire garden. You can see the perimeter fencing on the picture on the left. As soon as that got done, they started ripping stuff out. What you're seeing ripped out here is a water feature that has since been completed, but it was a giant mess. It was a total destruction zone all over the park. Next. And then things turned around and we started the construction phase. Here you can see the big earth mover thing. There's a lot of big equipment in that park. It is a hard hat zone. And then they started putting in pathways. What they are doing in the park is they're building an ADA pathway that will extend all the way from a children's playground north of the Japanese Garden. It will wind through the garden and then down over a little river to the rec center. And this is, you can see how they're forming the sidewalk, and then they have since laid concrete in there. Next. Okay, this is one of my favorite pictures. We have 2 water features in this park, and the gentleman on the right he works for a company that builds rock waterfall features. He goes all over the country doing it, but he always hires somebody to work with him for individual products. The gentleman on the left is his helper, and he grew up in this park. So he was so excited to make his park better that he got the whole crew excited. So everybody's on board, everybody's happy about this park. So it's been a lot of fun watching them work. Next. Here is one of the waterfalls that is almost finished. It's functioning. This is on the western edge of the park, and it goes down towards the little lake that's in Kid Springs. Next. Here we have the other water feature. On the left, you can see when they're still working it. There is no bridge. They had taken out the old bridge, which was very rickety and need to be gone. And they have since completed the bed of this waterway and have put in a new bridge. There are rock features in there, so it actually sounds like a babbling brook. It's really quite lovely. And that is now complete. Next. This, I'm switching gears now to what I did all summer at the Japanese garden. I could only go there on Sundays when no construction was going on. It was a hard hat, steel-toed shoe kind of a place, so I couldn't go there. On the right, you'll see a quick connect. That is the only water source for the entire Japanese garden. And it's used by both the construction workers and me on Sundays. So if you look on the left, all of that stuff you're seeing, every Sunday I would come in with about 200 feet of hose, hook it up, drag that hose over all that construction stuff to get to the beds that needed watering, which this summer, being a drought summer, was quite a lot of work. All the other irrigation in the park was shut off, and it will be rebuilt again when they're finished. But this was what I did all summer. If I wanted to tell you about my summer report, this was it. Next. Okay. During the drought, it was all about watering. Then we got rain in August. So I switched gears quickly from triage watering to triage weed pulling. Here you see on the right is bamboo, which is like my evil enemy. And my second evil enemy on the left is nutgrass. So we just had a nutgrass explosion in a few of our beds, and I did that. But I'm back to watering now because we're back to having drought. So maybe all these weeds will die. Next. Now we're thinking about how we're going to rebuild the beds. On the right, these are some pigeonberry plants that I'm propagating at my house. It will be a bed that will be a pigeonberry bed. I think it could look really good, but it is an experiment. We'll find out. We're definitely going native. We've learned that from the past few winters and this past summer. On the bed at the left, that's everybody's favorite friend, horseherb. That horseherb loves that bed. It's supposed to be different plants in there, but the horseherb continues to be in there. So I said, nuts to that, it's going to be a horseherb bed. I will put in a border and see if I can get it to behave itself a little bit and look a little bit more cultivated, but that's where we're headed. Next. This gave me bad dreams one night. This is a new bed that got carved out by the winding ADA pathway that's running through the park now. We have to develop this bed. What you're seeing right now is just hard packed soil, just trashed. Since I took this picture, they did put in some topsoil, but it's going to all have to be amended and worked on before we can even think about planting anything in it. And when we do think about planting, it has to be stuff that can handle drought, and it can handle a public park where sometimes the irrigation doesn't work. So we're being very, very thoughtful about what we're putting in this park. It will not be a traditional Japanese garden. It's going to be a Western version of a Japanese garden. And further, this park is very popular, and we get kids and dogs and families. And We just have to be able to accommodate that. So our plants have to be tough. Next. Here's a few of the native plants. These are old pictures because all of this stuff got kind of killed. On the right is Pavonia. We had a bed near the bridge of Pavonia. It was just beautiful, and it will go back there, and it was very successful. On the left, this is a picture from last year. It's one of our 3 artifacts, and it's surrounded by Turk's cap. So we're going in that direction. Stuff that likes living here, stuff that can survive when it doesn't get water. And I think that's it. The park opens probably, I don't know, maybe in a month or 2 months. And then hopefully we will get people who are interested in Japanese gardens to come out.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carolyn. That was very, very informative, and so much work is being done. I can't wait to see what it's going to finish out like. So thank you for that. Next, I would like to introduce our last speaker, who is Alexa Peterson, class of 2022, who is our webmaster. And she's going to give us a little tutorial on how to go about navigating our website. Alexa, are you there?
Nice meeting you, by the way.
Yep, nice to meet you too. Oh, yep, I'm here.
Okay. You want to go ahead and unmute, or if you're going to do a PowerPoint, go ahead and do that.
No, I didn't have a PowerPoint presentation. I was actually wanting to make sure that everybody knew that there is now technical support available for our website. So the main goal was just to kind of introduce myself and then say, hey, this is finally back up and running. So if you guys have issues with logging in, or maybe you're trying to download a document and it's not working, you can just email support@DallasMasterGardeners.org. So just as the regular website, just add support in front of it and you'll be good to go. And we are aware of the login issue, where sometimes people will go to reset their password and that will just fail, but not give you a message that there's an error. It just won't work. So if you run into that problem, you can definitely reach back out to me, the webmaster, and I don't mind if you use the email that's located in VMS. Just be aware that there is about a 24-hour turnaround. So I'm usually pretty good. I can get it done right away if you do need your password reset, but there may be a little bit of a delay. So if you run into problems related to the association's website, or if you're trying to get documents or materials to anyone for an article or for a project and you can't, just reach out to me and I can help you with that.
Okay, super. Thank you, Alexa. Appreciate it. And thank you for taking on this wonderfully large job. It's much appreciated, and the association is all the better for your efforts. So thank you very much. That brings us to the conclusion. Yes, our next monthly meeting is our annual business meeting. It's going to be in person only. It's going to be at Raincatchers, which is Walnut Hill Christian Church, 11001 Midway Road in Dallas. Being it's our business meeting, lunch will be provided. And the folks at Raincatchers are going to provide tours starting between 10:30 and 11. And you can see all that they've done there. It's rather amazing. And have some lunch and pick up your Japanese maple tree that you've ordered. And we'll vote for our new board of directors. So there will be a sign-up genius on the link in the website calendar to attend, and also in mark your calendar. So thank you all very much. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and thank you for all you do.